or 50+2 or 75%. So given that it is such a key part of your message and your promise, can you talk and reflect a little bit more about what is unity when you see it and as you define it?
I think it makes up several of the issues, the points you made. One is unity requires you to eliminate the vitriol. Make anything that you disagree with.
So good afternoon. I am watching the president's press conference. He has a signing on manufacturing standards, and we're talking about one of the reporters just asked him what he thought unity meant.
Where things go, number one. Unity also is trying to reflect what the majority of the American people, Democrat, Republican, Independent.
This whole concept of unity is amazing. It is. We talked about on Thursday empathy and what he called for in his speech, but if you talk to anybody right now, the media pushes this and political parties push this idea that we are more divided now as a country than ever. No, we're not. It's just not true. As a country, we are as divided as we always are. We have been. The election wasn't even especially close. We've had election after election after election that are very, very close, very angry, nasty. We have, this is not, people, John Adams didn't wait for Thomas Jefferson to take office. So the things we're seeing now are not new. Our country was built on a system where parties fight and they go at it. And that almost guarantees that minority parties have some level of representation and have some voice. All that's happened now is we have, because of social media, given small groups of people very loud voices. And that has become, the Republicans and the Democrats have become identified by these small groups who just happen to be the loudest in the room. But the fighting that we see, the political infighting, the political parties going at each other is nothing new. We are not more divided now than ever. This is a country that had a civil war. The idea that we're more divided is absurd. It's crazy. But for politically, it is what it is. We need civility. Yeah, we absolutely need civility. But what if we never get it? If there's never civility, if the same vitriol keeps up, and by the way, go back and read some of the political propaganda from past elections, from around 10, 20, 30 years ago, 100 years ago, 150 years ago. It was ugly. It was nasty. It was personal. We can call for civility, but there's no guarantee we're going to get it. But we still have democracy. We still have our country. And whether we're civil or not, we still have an obligation to move that forward. And that's why the attack on the Capitol was the comparison to Black Lives Matter didn't matter. It was a nonsense comparison. It's an attack on our Capitol. That's our attack on democracy. That's what cannot happen. You can be nasty. We can have vitriol. We've always had that. It's gotten nastier now because we are so easily able to spread misinformation and false news, and small groups of people. Two people can get together in a room and write things on social media, get it shared like crazy. Look how quickly memes about Bernie Sanders have spread over the internet. It was last week. Within 24 hours, the internet was covered in memes of Bernie Sanders. It's funny. Every local businesses like pizza places, picture of Bernie Sanders in a chair with mittens outside their place. That's what social media does. Our politics have not changed. We're not nastier than it's ever been. Simply not true. It's always been this way. That's part of democracy. What's different is that we are now giving voices to small groups, fringe groups, without giving any credence. The media at one point held this gate, right? The information you got from the media. We could talk about the media used to be so much more honest. It was never more honest. They were always deciding what to cover, what not to cover, what to present, what not to present. Rob, what is up with Biden's ruling on insulin? My daughter has an insulin-dependent diabetic. I don't know the answer to that. I'll look it up later on tonight, Rob. I'm sorry. I don't know what the issue is. In the state, we passed some laws to get insulin prices down. I'm not sure what Biden ruled on insulin. If you can give me more information, I'd be glad to take a look at that. But in any event, we'll talk a little bit about the debate between parties as we talk about the teacher's contract in Brantford. So those of you not watching from Brantford, this is relevant to you. Every town has these. Every town discusses teacher contracts, usually teacher contracts for 3 or 4 years, and it happened here in Brantford. And it's a good opportunity to look at where opinions and facts don't always jive and come together. And we have the standard political stances being taken. One is, oh, they're union, just pay teachers like crazy. The one is, no, we're paying too much and it's going to hurt us long term. And there are facts that play a significant role in that. And there's also the standard political arguments that don't really hold up when you look at logic and reason. So in Brantford, there was a contract for the teachers, just came up, it just passed on the RTM. Our RTM, if you're not from Brantford, is the representative town meeting. That is our legislative body. And the contract, the teachers union is the largest union, as it is in most towns in Brantford. And the contract called for about an 8.3% increase over 3 years. So that's with compound interest, all this other stuff. It's about 2.7, 2.8% per year. That is larger than most of the raises given to town employees. Most raises given to town employees is in the 2 to 2.5% range. The problem with giving a significant raise in a contract is that every contract then becomes a precedent for the next contract. So not only the next teacher's contract in 3 years, but also fireman's contract and police contracts and all of those things of that nature. And so it is not a small thing. However, this state, Connecticut, has, and we have heard Democrats and Republicans talk about the issues here, has what's called binding arbitration, which means if you do not support it and it goes to arbitration, the arbitrator, a third party, will rule, and that ruling is final. It doesn't go back to the legislature. And that arbitrator often looks at things like the town's ability to pay for something. So wealthier towns often get hit a little higher because they have more access to money to pay those contracts. So in the negotiations, Okay, so I'm going to go back to Rob for a second. Rob asked me about insulin. He froze Trump's rule on lowering insulin prices. Biden signed a few executive orders in the last couple of days, freezing a lot of Trump's rules just to reevaluate them. I very much doubt he will pass anything that increases those prices. It was to put a hold on things, especially things he signed late, to put a hold, reevaluate, and come back afterwards. So I don't know what the time frame is. I will do some research on that tonight. We'll definitely talk about it tomorrow, Rob. But I know, when, I'm not sure when that insulin bill passed, but or when that executive order was initially passed, but I will do some research on that tonight. Thanks for bringing that up. So we have this contract. And again, this applies to every single town. Every single town has a teacher's contract. And then you get into the arguments. And then you get to the floor of the RTM. And you hear the Democrats say, well, teachers work very hard and they deserve this raise. And you hear the Republicans say it's too big of a raise and it sets a bad precedent and we need to send it back. So we're going to talk about both sides of those arguments. One is, and we hear this every single contract when it gets to a vote, that this group works hard. No kidding. Teachers work hard. Firemen work hard. Union members work hard. For all the crap they take, state workers do work hard. I don't want to work at DMV. I don't want to do it. They get up every day and they do it and they deal with the public and they do work hard. And they should be paid and they should get modest raises. The problem with that argument, they work hard so we should give them more money, is what is the number then? Then why not give them 20%? Why not 30%? And to bring up, they worked hard during COVID, and no question, I have talked to so many teachers during COVID, and it is incredibly difficult what they have to deal with. No question about it. But during COVID, they kept their jobs. During COVID, they kept their benefits. A lot of self-employed people didn't. A lot of people in the entertainment industry and restaurants did not. One of the benefits of being in a union, and especially a public sector union, is you have job security the private sector does not have. So yes, you can go to those teachers and say, you did a great job. We want to give you more than the standard 2%. We want to give you 2.7%. But I tell you what, those teachers would rather have a job and no increase than that raise. And I can tell you the exact same thing about firemen and police, because when COVID started, they were the ones, and we have firefighters on my Facebook feed that came out and said, we're just grateful to have jobs right now. This argument of they did a good job so they should get a raise, they're going to get a raise no matter what. They're in unions. Have you ever heard the argument about unions saying, you know what, they really didn't do a good job last year. Let's take a pay cut. That's never happened, ever. But you have Democrat after Democrat getting up saying, oh, they did such a great job, they deserve this raise. It has nothing to do with deserve. They're in a union, they negotiate, they have contracts, they're going to get some raise. The fact that it was over 2.5%, really over 2%, was excessive, no question. Now, there's the other side of that. And then there's the Republican argument that's like, wait a minute, this is too high and we need to reject this. Well, here are the facts. If the Republicans and the RTM won and they rejected this contract, here's what would happen. It would go to binding arbitration. And when it goes to binding arbitration, the superintendent in Branford would look at the head of the union and say, listen, we have an 8.3% increase in this. Let's make it 8.2999%. They'll hand it to the arbitrator. He'll say, sure, no problem. They'll write a $10,000 to $15,000 check to the arbitrator for this arbitration, and it'll be done. It does not come back to the RTM. The fact of the matter is, the logic for voting for it didn't make sense on the Democratic side, but it really made no sense to vote against it because the RTM has no actual control over that contract because of the way binding arbitration rules work. Where the RTM does have control over education funding is in the total amount. By law, the RTM, the legislative body, towns do not have control with how much or where things are spent inside of an education budget. The Board of Ed has complete control of that. The only control the town side has is in the total amount given to the Board of Education. So in Branford, it's about $60 million. They can say, wait a minute, we're giving you a 0% increase this year. Then the Board of Ed has to find a way to incorporate those union contracts and still save that money. Contract goes up 2.7%, but your overall budget stays the same. You got to make that up somewhere. They could do that a couple different ways. They can cut somewhere else. They can cut total number of teachers. Our former first selectman, Democrat Unc DeRoss, used to say on a regular basis, our teachers are some of the best in the state. We just have too many of them. That's one legitimate argument. Anthony Alfone, Woodbridge ended up with a 9.7% increase when they went to arbitration. Now, I don't know how many years is that. Is that over 3 years, Anthony? If it's over 3 years, that's based on ability to pay. It doesn't make sense for the legislative body to reject a teacher's contract. It simply doesn't. The only control they have is when the full budget once a year comes. Lorena Vegas, East Haven has a $47 million budget, but gets $18 million in grants back. I'm underwhelmed. So $18 million in ECS dollars. I'm not sure what that's. Okay, so Anthony, 3 years. And to those that are new to this podcast, I'm responding to the comments that come in. If you're watching this on the Facebook page, Steve Mazzacane Podcast, you may want to go to the Brandford7.com Facebook page. More comments are on there. I get them all kind of put together when they come to me. But if you're interacting with the comments, that may be helpful. So Woodbridge, and that's a good example. So if it goes to arbitration in Woodbridge, or even if it doesn't, the people who are negotiating it know the ability to pay is there. The town's in good fiscal shape. They're getting a 9.7% increase. So that's what, 3.2, 3.3 a year in that town. Now, we don't know the context of that. Like sometimes the past negotiation, they got up with 1.9%, so they're making up the difference. I don't know the background on that. But the fact of the matter is, the argument of you worked hard for this and therefore should get a higher raise is a nonsense argument. It makes no sense. It's made constantly. It's made in every single. It's all political, patronizing that group of people. Our firemen worked really hard so they get this. That's not why they got it. Our police work really hard so they get this. Until one of those Democrats gets up and says to me, you know what? Our police sucked last year. So therefore, let's take 2%. Then yelling for 2% raise over merit is nonsense. It's not a merit increase. It's a negotiated increase. Whether a police is good or not, a cop is good or not, fireman good or not, teacher good or not, they're still getting the increase. It has nothing to do with merit. That's a nonsense argument. But to vote against it doesn't make any sense because it's just going to get negotiated and done anyway. If you're serious about that contract, coming up in 2 or 3 months in Branford and in every town, we have a standard process in most towns, their town budget. And you get to decide what the Board of Ed budget is, the total number. That is not something that goes to binding arbitration. That is not something that becomes negotiated. The problem is we get back to that meeting in 2 or 3 months. We'll get a meeting on the RTM floor, and their legislators will say, oh, man, some will get up and say, we need to cut their budget. We need to be at 0%, or we need to be at 1%, or even at 2%. Because right now, if you said 2% on the teacher's budget and their contract went up 2.7%, they're going to have a hard time getting to that number, unless they're reducing staff. But we're going to have the same argument all over again. Democrats will get up and say, if you don't support a 2% or 3% or 4% or 5% increase, then you hate teachers and puppies and children. Because they make that argument every time. The Republicans will get up and say, oh my God, this is going to kill our tax base, kill our taxpayers and our property tax. If somebody has the guts to do it, the RTM can stand up and say, you know what? We don't like what happened with that contract, and we're going to give you a 1% increase this year instead of a 2% increase, or a 2.5 or 2.7% increase. Will it happen? Be hard to do. They have the votes to do it. It may be prudent fiscally to do it, but it takes courage. And I'm not someone who's opposed to giving the Board of Ed money and paying teachers and making sure they have the funding. I am someone who believes we have probably hired far too many administrators. And administrators are $150,000, $160,000, $170,000 each. And I would guarantee you the average teacher in Branford will tell you we've hired too many administrators. The problem is if you said, okay, we think you've hired too many administrators, we're not going to give you the increase you want, there's nothing saying that the reductions would come from the administrators. Because the administrators make that decision. So the state has set up a system where the Board of Ed is basically autonomous. And you give them their money, or they claim you hate education and hate puppies and children. And then if you decide, listen, I don't want you to have as many administrators as you're getting, they turn around and say, I don't care. I'm going to cut more teachers. Or what many towns end up doing, and Branford has done in the past, we're going to cut things like school sports, which sets parents crazy. We're going to cut theater. Oh my God, World War III is happening. It's the end of the world. And there's a game that is played over and over and over again. If you want to fix that game, it requires the Democrats and Republicans to have a unified front. The Democrats have to stop playing this whole you hate puppies and children if you don't support this thing. And the Republicans have to be, okay, let's work out a reasonable number and fix it and set to that number, and everybody votes the same way. Democrats all vote in lockstep anyway. Republicans in this town are a little more like herding sheep. And that's different in every town. Some towns, Republicans are that way, Democrats are the opposite. They have to work together to do it. Otherwise, the same thing, and I'll predict the same thing is going to happen. The Board of Ed will come forward and ask for a 2.5% raise. They'll get to the floor. Democrats will say, well, they worked really hard and they should get it, and we care about our kids. Again, then give them 20%. The Republicans will say it's too high, and the question is, 1 or 2 people, will they jump ship and vote another way? I believe the vote on the floor, and Anthony might have the answer to this, was like 17-16. We didn't even have, I'm not 17-16. There were some RTM members missing. One Republican had resigned earlier that day. One Democrat's wife is a teacher, so he didn't take a vote. And that can all be negotiated. But if the RTM wants to take back its power, the legislative body in town wants to take back its power, and they're willing to take criticism from some parents, and the Board of Education will play a game. They'll play a dirty game where if you cut them more than they want, they will go back to parents and say, not that we're cutting an administrator, that we are going to cut sports, pay to play. We're going to make your kids pay to play soccer or play hockey or whatever. Or we'll cut the theater program. And the next meeting, the RTM meeting, will be packed with 47 kids that'll be crying that somebody cut violin practice or something. You know, there's an interesting article. Anybody who's watched this podcast on a regular basis knows how passionate I am about financial literacy and the need to promote financial literacy. And this year, a financial literacy bill was proposed in the legislature. And I don't know if it gets anywhere or not. But in the article that talked about it, I don't know if it was, I don't think it was the Connecticut Mirror. It was another site that was writing about it. And one of the quotes was, you know, the problem with this is where do you come up with the money for financial literacy? And I would make the argument of how is financial literacy not an absolute must? I would take financial literacy over the theater program. I'll take financial literacy over music or art or learning French. I don't know. But financial literacy is a basic thing that we as students, as humans, as adults, as active members of a society need. You want to talk about overcoming racism? Teach kids in the inner city to save money. Period. If you start teaching a kid at 9, 10, 11 years old to save money and watching it grow, talk to anybody in their 60s and 70s and they will tell you about when they were a kid, New Haven Savings Bank in this area used to come into classrooms and kids would bring in 10 cents, 50 cents, $1, whatever it is. They would watch it grow with interest. And when you start those habits young, they become normal habits. When you're 18 and 19 and 20 and 21 and 22, you're no longer living paycheck to paycheck. You've got a couple $1,000s saved. And when you become 25 and 26, you've got $15,000, $16,000, $17,000 saved. When you learn to prioritize saving over an extra movie ticket or a better phone or whatever it is that people spend money on today, an extra Amazon Prime subscription, that changes the way you think. And we're talking about this because the Board of Ed has not yet prioritized the things that are most important. If the legislature wants to take a stand and they have some guts and they work in a bipartisan manner, they can stand up and say, no, we want you to make these changes. And they have to be public about it so that the Board of Ed can't then turn around and go to the public and say, wait, they're killing puppies and children and we're going to pay to play and you have to pay to play sports. Because that's always the go-to. We're out of money. We're going to have to charge you to play soccer. It's always the go-to. Well, we're not going to be able to do as many plays. So in the past, it's been bipartisan. In the past, there's been criticism from Democrats in Branford on the number of teachers that we have. I am critical on the number of administrators that we have. It just seems to grow. And I'm even more critical of this program of having far more coaches. We hire a math coach and an English coach and an business coach and then an implementation coach. And there's a coach for the coaches. And then there's teachers that don't want to be teachers. They suddenly get this position of coaching. And we have this whole nother layer of positions. And the sad part is the legislature may see that as an issue. They may turn around and say, we're cutting your budget until you fix it. But the Board of Ed will play a better game and they will go public and say, oh my God, they attacked us. They took our money from us. They don't care about our kids. And therefore, we will charge you to play hockey and we will charge you to play soccer and we will cut theater. The things that people are the most passionate about. It's a little bit sad that those are the things people are the most passionate about. Because if they had said, we're going to cut the English program, no one would show up to that meeting. We're going to cut math. Who gives a shit? Victoria, I saw a middle school that does a real world game. They're all given 35,000 fake dollars and they have to provide themselves with food, lodging, transportation. Such a cool idea. It's absolutely a good idea and it's necessary. I don't know, this was about 2-3 years ago at Starbucks was talking to a bunch of kids who were 18, 19 years old, still lived home. These are 19-year-old kids. And I asked them what they thought a mortgage cost. Most of the answers were $500 or $600. Most of the answers. And I said, all right, let's go online. We went to Zillow, and Zillow on the bottom has the average mortgage. And I said, pick a house that you want. And they were picking $350,000, $400,000, $500,000. I told not over $1 million. They're picking very nice houses, not overly top houses. You saw a mortgage that was $2,200, $2,300. And I said, okay, now let's add taxes to that. Let's insurance to that. And they were stunned when they realized a mortgage was going to be $3,000 a month. They had no idea, no concept of that. They know how much a car costs because they're looking for cars, but no concept of what housing actually costs. And let me make this abundantly clear, what we don't teach the kids. How much you save is directly proportional to what you value. If you value having both a Netflix and a Disney Plus and an HBO Plus and an Amazon Prime subscription to watch any show you want, and you're going to drop $60, $70 in those subscriptions, then you value that more than savings. The question is now, Can you now spend all that money on things where you could easily save and then say, wait a minute, I need state aid on something. Wait a minute, I want food stamps, or I want all these other benefits by the state because I don't have any money. Can you say, I want a new phone for $1,000? My phone is $1,000. It's a, what is it called? A Samsung S10 Plus. Now they're probably up to Samsung Galaxy. They're probably up to like Galaxy numbers 27 or something like that. They have a new one come out every 30 seconds. But it's $1,000 and it costs you something on your cell phone bill. It adds $30 or something like that. But I could have gone in when I went in and purchased a flip phone for $10. Right? Those are choices that we make. But kids are not taught that. Kids aren't taught, and a lot of them are working anyway. They are working after school jobs. Karen's Corner, a ton of kids. A lot of kids are working in fast food. They have jobs after school. They have jobs over the summer. They're not taught to save. Andrea, I've been saying for years that they need to learn about savings, mortgages, and college loans. I would argue they need to learn about investing, a 401k, a Roth IRA, how to buy stock, what a PE ratio is, what a basic earnings report looks like. I would take kids and just teach 5 companies that you know, Disney and Netflix and Tesla, and teach them how to analyze a stock. If you bought Tesla last March, you made 5 times your money. By the way, to those that watch this podcast on a regular basis, 2 stocks I've mentioned in the last few months. CVS, I told you to buy at 56. I think it's at 72. And I said to buy Cinemark at 13, which I did. That's at 21. So congratulations if you jumped on my stock picks. As you know, and I've talked about this before, I buy them, and as soon as it's up $1 or $2, I get out. But if you are a long-term buyer, you did quite well on those. Michael, if they want to cut, then their bonuses should be cut first. With all the classroom cuts, what happens with faculty-student ratios and faculty support like paraprofessionals? Aren't those considered critical? So if it was up to me, if I was creating an education plan, I would have fewer administrators and far more paras. I think paras are the hidden gem of our school system. A lot of these paras are very well educated, but even if they're not, they're the ones that are working one-on-one with these kids. And I can tell you from experience, because I've sat in some of these classrooms, classroom of 20 kids for a teacher, if they're all on the same level, is great. What ends up happening in every classroom is 1 or 2 or 3 of those kids take up 80 to 90% of the teacher's time. And that ends up impacting how far every kid in that class can go. But when you take a para and put it in that classroom, or 2 paras and put it in that classroom, and they work, especially with those children, the class can go further. If I was spending money in education, and I'm not an educator, you have to have a doctorate in education in order to get in, and they all help each other out. That's just a closed kind of thing that they have there. But if I would have far more paraprofessionals, less administrators. Andrea, investments too. I agree. I need to learn about investments myself. Yes, learn basic things. And if you don't want to know stocks, learn about mutual funds. Just basic mutual funds, start putting money. I still have, and I started this years and years ago, every Thursday morning, $10 goes from my account to my TD Ameritrade account. The fact of the matter is, I will never change that. I don't raise the amount. Just a $10 is a constant reminder that you have to keep saving money. It doesn't mean you're never going to spend it. You may put a down payment on a house. Last year was rough because of COVID, so it went into savings. You had to, but it's there. The decision to live paycheck to paycheck for many is a decision. It's about your own priorities. Are you prioritizing a Netflix subscription over savings? Are you prioritizing a nicer phone over savings? That's a choice. And then as government, as a public sector, we now have to ask ourselves, wait a minute, is this person coming for help? If they legitimately need help, great. But if they've made decisions to not save, if they've made decisions to spend on things that they don't actually need, and now they're coming for help, we have a right as citizens to say, wait a minute, what's going on here? It's not evil. If you're questioning how money is being spent on a social safety net, that's not an evil thing. Doesn't mean you hate puppies and children. You can ask that question. Politically, those people are attacked. How dare you question food stamps? No, I want people to get it who need it. But it is hard when you're seeing people make decisions that easily could be different. and save a lot of money that are then going to government for help. Kathy, go to Locast for local. I don't know what that is. Michael, I'm considering making a few YouTube videos on basic life skills. I'm sure there are many of those videos. I think the Women and Family Life Center in Guilford was doing some sort of financial literacy planning. My financial literacy planning, if I were to do one, would be entirely based on investments. And I think kids would get excited about investments. I think if kids bought Disney and they understood what Disney was and they saw Disney Plus and they can relate to that and watch that stock grow. Disney was a $90-something stock not long ago. It's $175 now. It's ridiculous. Companies they know about, they've heard, they will get excited when they start doing that. I've seen that happen. We have to start younger. We have to prioritize that. And if that means prioritizing that over theater, over the arts, over sports, yeah, I would prioritize that in our school system. Andrea, paras are absolutely an asset. I agree. Michael, the sad part is that one administrator's salary could pay for more than 4 paras. Oh, absolutely. No question about it. We have administrators that are making 150, 160, 170. Paras don't come anywhere. You can get 5 or 6 paras. Actually, maybe more for that salary. Is Dr. Fauci worth $417 a year, highest paid government employee? The question on that is, if in the private sector, you'd ask, is he worth that? Is there demand for him in that position? Now, he's become a spokesman for a huge department in many ways. And if you go to the private sector and look at people who handle PR for large, like Pfizer, those types of companies, 417 is probably low. Is he worth it? That's up to you. That's up to whoever deciding what he get paid. But in general, a PR guy who has his kind of background for a Pfizer is probably making $250,000 to be on the board and probably $500,000 to be a PR guy, get in front of a camera. Okay, so it's 4:33. That was an interesting discussion, but that teacher contract's interesting because it puts into perspective the standard political arguing points that don't have any merit in reality. One side's always yelling emotion. They worked hard for this. That doesn't play a role. This is not a merit increase. We're not paying different teachers different amounts. And there are drastically different qualities when it comes to teaching and abilities. We're not going to one teacher and say, you were great, here's 4. Here's another teacher, you were terrible, here's 1. It's not happening. It's across the board. It has nothing to do with the job that they've done. It's just political nonsense being spewed by people on camera. Conversely, voting against the contract didn't make sense when we look at the actual process. It goes to arbitration. The two sides have been negotiating for the last 2 months. They were just going to go back and say, let's take a penny out to say we changed it, go to the arbitrator, everybody shakes hands, the arbitrator takes a check for $15,000, and we all walk away. That's all that would have happened. If you want to make a difference as a town, and you want to fight back on education creep, and that expense is just growing and growing and growing, you turn around and say, listen, I'm going to cap your annual total education budget. And you could do that at 2%, you could do it at 1%, you could do it at whatever. This year, wouldn't be shocking if they came in and said, okay, we want 2.5%, 3% because of these contracts that we've signed. And they're going to say something like this: we need to be 2.5% because we have contractual obligations. That's the biggest pile of bullshit. You have contractual obligations that tell you how much a person has to be paid. You do not have a contractual obligation that tells you how many people you have to have. So if you have 300 employees, there's nothing saying you can't figure out a way to have 295. This is the spin and political maneuvering that we see in these contracts and in the debates that we see in every single town, in every single union contract. So whether you're in Brantford or not, you've seen this, it's happened in your town. And the arguments are almost identical. I've been to all the different legislatures, not all of them, but many of them. Board of Ed meetings are always the same conversation. The arguments are always the same. The political parties are always predictable. The other thing that's always predictable, and I always laugh about this, every single town I've gone to, when the school does a play, everybody gets up and says, oh my God, that was Broadway quality. Oh my God, that play, our students put on a Broadway quality play. Oh, I've been to Broadway. They put on a great play. It wasn't Broadway quality. I laugh every time I hear that happen constantly. It's in every single town. It's the same. Our school is phenomenal for plays or whatever it is. But if you threaten theater, If you threaten music, if you threaten sports, the room will be packed with parents. Threaten to reduce English? No one will show up. It's the same political game. Okay, went a little long today, but that's okay. I enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for all the comments. The comments help. Feel free to comment away, have a conversation. Let me respond where I can, and go from there. And Colin just gave me Colin is our arts guy, who is doing, by the way, a great job with the town. Obviously, COVID has hurt it, but the amount of arts we see in Brantford, not just with the school play, but outside of that. So Colin's a friend. I didn't mean in any way, shape, or form to offend Colin Sheehan. He's a great guy. But yes, I will take a 10% reduction in the arts if I can have financial literacy in school. I will take that. Just not anything Colin does. Gene, I learned so much from. Thank you very much, Gene. I appreciate it. Kathy, thank you for that. And Michael, have a great night. Guys, I hope you all have a great night. I will talk to you tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Good night.